what I've learned is that, you can, if you have the ability to tell a story and to do certain things with the book, and a lot of it's organizing and doing certain things, you really can, help someone else write their story. I've made a career out of being completely outside of the box and not being known for kind of anything.
It was sometime in the winter of 1999. It's January or February, I think, when Illinois is cold and gray and you're starting to believe it will never be warm again. It was at this time I started a job at a small publishing house in the suburbs of Chicago. I was excited to learn the book business and design book covers and meet with authors and explore story. I had such a romanticized view of everything. What ended up being one of the many great chapters of working there was meeting a group of young professionals, of which many have stayed in touch with over the years. One in particular, we used to sit and laugh and joke and talk about movies and music and dream about what the future could be like. Could we start our own businesses? Or in today's guest's ideal dream, make a career in being an author? So it is truly exciting for me to share Travis's story, which is proof that with some grit, the ability to shift, dreams can come true. Enjoy the show. Travis, thanks for joining me on the show. And I was trying to think last night as I was getting ready. We met, I think, in 1999.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So you and I were both working at a publishing house, Tyndale House. And you know what I don't know? Give me sort of the kind of, where did Travis grow up, and then kind of what transpired from then to me meeting you at Tyndale House? Like, yes. What was young Travis's life like on his way to becoming an author?
Well, I've got a unique story because I am one of those people. It was in third grade. I was living in Munich, Germany. My father worked in pharmaceutical sales, and every opportunity he got, he moved our family. So we lived everywhere. And so I was living in Munich, and my third grade teacher encouraged me in my writing. And that combined with her reading the Narnia Chronicles by C.S. Lewis, that's what did it. I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a writer one day. And I was never a good student.
In third grade, you're telling me right now, little Travis knew he wanted to be an author.
Yes. And I actually have. I've saved every single thing I've ever written as if it's one day going to be in a museum, which is ridiculous.
Right. Or when Tom Hanks plays you in your movie, yes. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I still have that notebook. I've got this pirate story where it's like where the moment she encouraged me. I remember it's Miss Miller. I've never been able to contact her, but yeah, I remember that vividly. And then years later, in ninth grade, I was living in North Carolina, and this was, before the internet and all this sort of stuff, social media and, iPhones. And so one summer I decided to, I think it was before ninth grade, decided to write a novel. I wrote a whole novel in pencil, finished it, and it was terrible. It was just ridiculous. But as I've always said, when I try to encourage people with writing, I said, I finished it, and that was like the best thing I could have done, because in my mind, I'm like, well, I finished one, I can do it again. So
before we go on, what was the novel about? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And okay. I still have that too. It was about a guy whose fiance is murdered by the mafia. So then he just works his way up, just killing, them until he gets to the Godfather. And then he kills the Godfather, and that's the end. You can probably see why it was never published. It was just, it honestly was just something that I wanted to do for fun. And I actually started writing a sequel, but it was great because I finished it. And then even, after college, this was what I wanted to do, but I was not a good student. And even in English, I generally would not, I was just very average. But when I graduated college, I had a degree in communications, but really my degree was in beer. I'll just be honest. I was not
specialized in beer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was a troublemaker, and I didn't know what I was going to do, where I was going to go, except that I still wanted to write. So the job at Tyndale House was just a godsend. It was amazing because when I interviewed there, first off, I interviewed for like a copywriting position, copy editor, and they said, you're qualified, but your personality doesn't fit what a copy editor does. Just all day long working on a manuscript, which is ironic. That's exactly what I do. But they said, you're too extroverted. So then the author relations position came up, and it was a position where it's like I was a middle person between the publishing house and the authors. And I was like, look, this is the second best thing I could be doing other than writing full time. And I think, honestly, they had in mind probably more of a female than male because of, first off, females can relate better. I mean, that's a stereotype, but it is true. But it was an administrative job, and I was fortunate to get that. And even more fortunate, I was a few years, I started working there in 94.
Okay. So, was that your first job out of college?
No, I mean, I had like a couple of smaller jobs that were, ridiculous.
So this is your first big, like, kind of legit job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And I worked the same position. I mean, I grew it, but that's all I did 13 and a half years at Tyndale. And then we met, a life-changing moment was when we met. And
I mean, obviously, yeah.
Yes, of course.
Well, one of the things I want to say too, what I remember about you, and this is one of the things I really admired about you, and I enjoyed being able to, because we never completely worked directly together while we were there.
Yeah.
But I always felt you took the job seriously, but also you had a great joy about it. And when I would go to author meetings, talk to them about their covers or, see them at shows, they very much felt seen and taken care of and attached to you. So you, from my perspective, it seemed like you enjoyed the job. You did a great, job at that. What are some of the main things that you learned from that position?
Yeah, it really was amazing because I had to know a little bit of everything about the publishing house, because at first it was administrative, where I'm sending out checks and contracts and books and all that. So and at any point, what the position was really just to be a point person for the authors, so that if they had any sort of issue, question, they could contact me. And so the more I knew, I mean, I would get questions about kind of everything, like, print runs. And so I'd have to go talk to somebody in production, or, questions about marketing, questions about where, I've not heard from this acquisitions person for like 2 weeks. Did they die? Can you, I mean, right. And I'm like, oh, let me check. I mean, all those sorts of things, but it really grew into an acquisitional role, because a lot of, editors, especially the authors that you want to keep, a big part of it is just keeping in touch with them, keeping the relationship open. Like, hey, how you doing? Have any new ideas for books? And how are we doing?
You mean writers, like staying in touch with writers? Yes. And yeah, okay. So before we go too deep in there, maybe you could just give like a Cliff Notes version of what the publishing industry was like back then, just for those who aren't familiar with it. So I'll start it off what I think is true, right? So publishing house would either find an author would send a manuscript in, right, to an acquisition person, and then kind of what happens from there.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the idea of people sending in the manuscripts and it going into a slush file, that was always one of those things that is just a rarity, that an editor will find a manuscript and decide to publish it. That did happen, but Tyndale was real small at the time, for a publishing house, but we had our key authors, and what they do, they would sign a contract. And the first thing is like sign a contract, get the first payment, and then, they set the dates and all this sort of stuff. And typically it's like, okay, sign a contract, you have 6 months to a year or whatever to work on the book, hand it in. And then once they get the manuscript finished, they'll work with the acquisitions editor. But eventually there's like different steps in the editing process. There's like a line editor, there's copy editor, proofreader. And a lot of times those titles, even at a place like Tyndale, I mean, they would sometimes change where it's like acquisitions manager, blah, blah. Even for me, it was, I was author relations coordinator, and I was always like, I don't care about my title. I don't want a business card. I just want the authors to know who I am. And that's what's important. And I want my boss to know, my boss was Ron Beers, who, he was a publisher, still is, great guy. And I just wanted him to know, this is what I'm doing. But throughout the process, once an author gives their book to the editor, like I'm in this process now where I just two and a half weeks ago, I handed a book in to an editor. And so they're reading it, but it's like silence. And of course, as an author, I mean, I've been through this so many times, but still I'm always like, oh, what are they thinking? Are they enjoying it? Are they just, tearing it to shreds with a red marker? That sort of thing. So when I was at Tyndale House, I would a lot of times hear from authors after they delivered a manuscript, not that I had anything new, any sort of new information to give them, but it was more of like a sounding board, or more of just a lot of times I felt like I often call myself, like now I refer to it as like I was sort of a bartender or a counselor or
author whisperer. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's like that sort of thing, whatever the author needed, and so it's a long process. Publishing takes a lot of time. I mean, as you know, for instance, sometimes authors would see their covers and you were on the other side working on covers and presenting them, right? And,
yep.
And occasionally I'd hear from an author who was like totally distraught, like they didn't like the cover that, had been chosen. And I think Tyndale was always really, really great. I mean, we had such a great design team. And even there, I mean, the fact of wanting to take care of our authors, I mean, it wasn't like just me. I mean, it spread throughout the whole company.
Yeah,
and I think, and they're still really great at that. Some publishers, I tell you what, I wish they had author relations. It's sort of like they're the opposite. I'm like, it's like, wow, they're doing every single thing to like make a writer really hate them. I mean, that's rare, but I feel like
they're not making it easy. In other words, right? They're not taking care of you. Yeah.
No, but that doesn't happen much, but yeah. So it's a process. And the great thing was, I mean, I don't know how many authors I worked with, but it had to be, I'm thinking maybe over 1,000. I don't know. Like, and all of these are different. You had your children's book authors, your fiction authors, you had businessmen and pastors, and I mean, every type. And so that really just helped me see the variety of different people out there. And I kind of gleaned a little bit, I think, from every single person I worked with, how they work. And I mean, it just proves that I always say anybody can be a writer, but even just a published author, there's no one set way to do it. Everybody's different.
Well, I think what was extraordinary, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is your time at Tyndale being author relations. You were a part of, I don't know where it stands these days, but one of the greatest book series, right? Or high best-selling book series ever. It's got, I think, isn't it in the top 5 or 10 ever?
It's up there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was the Left Behind series. And were you, if I remember right, one of the main authors there, Jerry Jenkins, you were his author relations person as well, correct? Yep. Or was Jerry at a different level? Or did Travis still get to?
Jerry, Jerry was really, and still is, like he became a mentor to me. I remember I had only been there, honestly, at Tyndale maybe a month or two, and I saw on my desk in my inbox the contract for Left Behind, and it was a 1-book deal. And I remember I knew Jerry Jenkins because my father worked at Moody Press at the time, Moody Publishers. My dad had actually been hired by Jerry. And,
wow.
and it's a small world, but Yeah. And I knew Jerry wrote fiction. And I was like, once I learned sort of who Jerry was, even before Left Behind, I was like, that's what I want to do. And Jerry had given my dad some of his fiction to give to me. He had even signed, I have an early copy of a book before Tyndale, and he had signed it to me. And he said, read this, and then we'll talk about your writing. So this was
Wow, that is crazy cool.
Yeah. Oh, it was awesome. So when I saw that contract, I was like, whoa, it's awesome. And early on, Jerry lived not too far away. He lived in the Chicago suburbs. So I would go drive out and visit him. We just instantly hit it off. And this was like right at the start of Left Behind. And then once it started, I mean, it was insane. I tell people, other than there's the Harry Potter series, of course, you know, one of the biggest series ever. But at the time, the Left Behind series was right. I mean, it was second to that in terms of sales. It was just millions and millions of copies. And we were a small publisher. And it was a bit surreal. I look back at that and I just go, man, it was exciting. And, you know, it's, you know, one book became 3 books, became, 12, 30, and I mean, I don't know how many there are, prequels and sequels and
kid series. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so my job, so the fun thing, I have to tell this, I mean, it really was, I became sort of one of the main links to Jerry because of that relationship. I remember when he and his family moved to Colorado, Jerry, I said, look, Jerry, anything you need, Tyndale, we'll help you out and stuff. And he's like, well, are you serious? I mean, do you really mean that? And I'm like, well, of course. And he's like, well, here's the deal. We're what would you think about riding along with us, as we move? And because we're taking 2 vehicles, and he has 3 sons, but only one son was available to help. And he really it wasn't like he wanted help moving, like he had movers.
Right.
But I think he honestly it was like they were driving through the night and wanted somebody to just, probably keep him awake and just, so I'm, I asked my boss and, they were like, well, yeah, sure. So I literally got paid by Tyndale to ride across country with Jerry Jenkins, who, and every time I talked to him, I would just be picking his brain. How do you do this? And what do you think of this? And so tell me
that's amazing. You had a master class from a best-selling author in a variety of different ways. That's incredible. Yeah.
And I sent him an early draft of a book, I remember, and it was terrible. And he was so gracious. And he even at one point wanted to like really help edit it, and I remember, I was just like, I was a little too, I mean, I wasn't thick-skinned enough. Now I've got such thick skin. I mean, it's like leather. It's, but at the time, yeah, I was a young writer but my respect for Jerry and for so many authors that I worked with, I mean, the list, like Francine Rivers. So that's another novelist. She became another dear friend, her and her husband, Rick. And again, I would go fly out to see them, and I wouldn't be editing the book. I wouldn't be talking marketing. I remember I went out to see Francine Rivers, and the first time, and I brought this really great marketing, preparation plan that I had been given, and she threw it in the garbage. She literally, and she's like, I'm sorry, but I don't even want to look at that stuff because it stresses me out. I just need to write the book and you guys do what you need to do. And, again, she's coming from this certain aspect of how to write. And, so it was 13 and a half years of a master class, in a sense, like you said, learning not really how to write, but how to be a writer and how they think. And,
well, you also had this unique perspective of how the publishing world worked on both sides, right? So you had this sort of internal knowledge, right, on every level of department, from production to design to marketing to acquisitions. Yeah. And then you had the authors. You and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, and I think we even did with our friend Barry way back in the day, of just how similar, authors are creatives. So your description of sending a manuscript into a publisher and wondering like, do they like it? Do they not? Yes. I mean, that is our everyday as a creative, right? So I can totally relate to that. So year 13 and a half, right? And there's Travis. And so, what did you step right into becoming a full-time author? Like, how was that transition?
Yeah. I jumped off the cliff. That was the sort of, no, I think because like I loved my job so much and I gave it my all. And so just like so many people in, jobs, especially you've been doing so long, you just get burnt out. And I think for me, and I think you even remember me being burnt out probably, I think, relationships, when you're just constantly kind of giving your all, it became kind of overwhelming. And I was at Tyndale in 94. That's when I started. And then I got my first novel published in 2000. Mm-hmm. So I had this other sort of career, and it was, it was a secondary income, secondary thing. But for me, it was everything, I wanted, and I had always dreamt of, man, how awesome would it be to be a full-time writer? And so it was God's timing, I know, but, a financial advisor would have said, Travis, are you insane? Like, no, do not, leave. But, I did. It was an opportunity where it was, one book. Ironically, it was a book that got canceled that then I ended up selling to another publisher and I got a 4-book deal. And so it was like, okay, I've got a little bit of time and so I jumped into it. And so, yeah, it's been, I think now we're coming on, I've been a full-time writer longer than longer than I was at Tyndale. So I think it's been 14 years. It was 2017, but I remember that mark, the day like that I passed, because, I thought 13 and a half years at Tyndale was a long time. But then, I was like 13 and a half years of not knowing when I'm getting paid. That's what, in a sense. And I would not wish it on anybody because, you are creative, you're running your own business, and you have people, employees. You have people there, a whole team. I can't imagine that. And especially, forget even the pandemic, but just all the stuff in the last decade. And I quit Tyndale right before the market just went belly up in 2008. So, it was, I don't regret it ever. It was a great decision, but it was also one of these things that just, I was not prepared for it at all. I think we had Kylie, our youngest, she was like 6 or 8 months old. But it was something that, it was, like I said, 3rd grade. This is what I wanted to do. And I think the tension that I had at Tyndale, and it was always this tension, was here are these people doing what I want to do. And now, granted, not all of them were Jerry Jenkins. A lot of them, what I learned was that for every best-selling author, there are like 400 authors that they'll do a book or two, and those books don't really work. I shouldn't say they don't work, because a book's value, it doesn't come from how many copies it's sold. And that's not just a line that we tell an author after their book fails. I sincerely believe that, but in terms of just publishing, like, you have hopes for every single book. And then, how many books do you remember working on, and you spend all this time on an incredible cover, an incredible campaign, and then it doesn't work. And that's just one of these many things I learned at Tyndale House, and I've had to sort of accept a lot of times the hard way. But I had this tension at Tyndale where it was like the author and the author relations, and the longer time went by, it just felt like, I so desperately wanted to be an author. And I've learned a ton living the quote unquote dream, because, the dream it's always different when you're living it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally know. Well, I remember you were really gracious when I published my book, and we were very kind about it. And it's funny. I am been working on some other ideas, and I talked to my old publisher, and it was really funny. They were just like, "Well, it sold okay, didn't sell great. What are you going to do to help this one sell?" So it just feels, which is a totally appropriate and fair question. But since was it 10 years ago, the publishing industry has completely changed. So you're on your own. You get your 4-book deal. So just we'll jump ahead really quick, then we'll go back to that moment. But as of today, how many Travis Thrasher books have been, or ones you've been a part of, how many are on the shelves, quote unquote?
Okay, so that's, I get asked that every now and then, and I honestly can't answer it, because there's this thing like it's over. Like right now, it's over 75.
Come on.
Yeah, no.
Dude, that's amazing.
I
thought you were going to say, yeah, like 35.
Yeah, no.
It's just double that.
I mean, it's in like there are books, like, for instance, there's the novelization I did for it was a movie that ended up being done, like shown in Brazil. It was a novelization for, it's like a Brazilian pastor. And so the book was I've never seen a copy of it, but it was published, but it was only published in, I think it's Portuguese, right? I'm showing my ignorance at it, but it was, so I remember just wondering, like, did that book even ever happen? And I went online and I found it. I mean, it was very difficult to find. So then that's always sort of like, I've got different books like that I'm like, do I count that? Now I'm counting that one. But then what about ebooks? Because I don't count ebooks, but there are a handful of those. But all that said,
okay, hold on. We gotta just, before we move on too fast, why not count ebooks?
Well, when you said printed, I mean, like,
okay, the technicality. Okay, I hear.
No, I know.
So, but books, I mean, like you've written, like, so it's well over 70.
Yeah, it's over 70, and probably now more. So, all along I always like, and I still to this day, I love fiction, and it's always going to be my passion. And it's not like, I haven't had a chance to write as much fiction just because I've been doing so many collaborations. But if I was to say, like, okay, fiction versus nonfiction in terms of those books, it's probably close to half, because, I've done collaborations with people that are fiction, like doing a novelization of a film, that's fiction. Or, I've done a few where it's like writing a novel based on a song, but more and more, it was like, once I started doing collaborations and I was a full-time writer, one reason I've written so many books is just because I'm surviving as a writer. And especially when I started doing collaborations, ghostwriting or co-writing, however you want to call it, I started at the bottom. And when even people who knew me, like editors, and they knew I was a good writer, but I had only written fiction. So, okay, so now I'm going to write somebody's memoir. Well, I didn't have any experience that way. So I've had to slowly build my way up in terms of doing this and this and this.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about exactly there. So I think that's one of the things that makes you, at least from my knowledge, very talented and very unique in the industry. So you've written books completely on your own, but let's talk about this concept of collaboration. Like, what do you mean by that? And how did it start?
Yeah, I remember. So it was 2009, and I had been full-time writer for like a year and a half or so, and I had a variety of different novels that had come out or were coming out, and I was doing more of sort of suspense. And so I decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to write my big Stephen King epic dark novel for the general market. And because most of my books were being published in the Christian market. So I spent 9 months working on this. My agent knew about it. She liked the concept, the storyline. So I handed it in, and unfortunately, it was not good. And I remember, she
now,
sent
was
me
it not good, or was it just not accepted, or what makes you say it was not good?
No, it was, so the concept was good, but it kind of went off the rails. And the thing with a fiction versus nonfiction, like, books are all different, even the types of nonfiction. But for a novel, if it goes off the rails kind of in the middle, for instance, you can't just save the middle and keep the end in the beginning. It's really sort of like, okay, you gotta go back and redo it, and so I don't know. It really was not a well-written novel. And I really did sort of get lost in the character and the darkness, and, I understand. Even when I read her first email, my agent sent me a very long email. She was trying to be encouraging, but she just said, look, you've sort of lost your way in this. And what she was telling me is that she felt like she couldn't sell the manuscript. And now looking back so many years, she couldn't have. It just was not good. So that was, I remember reading the email, and it was brutal, because I'd spent 9 months, working on it with the hope and the need of her going out and selling it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to start almost from scratch. But it was, you'll like this story because you know the person, but she was, and this is true, she was literally typing this email to me saying, the 9 months that you've worked on this, sorry, but, you've got to go back to the drawing board. As she was typing this email, she got another email from Becky Nesbitt, who was no longer at Tyndale, but she used to be an acquisitions person at Tyndale House, a colleague and a friend. And she was now like a publisher, not publisher, an editor, or whatever you want to call, for another publishing house. And she sent my agent an email saying, hey, look, I know Travis is a fiction writer and he's doing lots of great things, but do you think he would be interested in a collaboration? And which was very polite, because Claudius, my agent at the time, sent me this secondary email, and she said, what would you think of that? Now, when I left Tyndale House, I was like, I'm never collaborating. I'm never co-writing, and part of that was ego. Part of it was I had seen the negative effects of like co-writing. And I wanted to write my own fiction and stuff like that. But when this opportunity came, I was like, thank you, God. Like, yes,
yes, I need it. Yes, please. Yeah. I
need it. And it was like one of the best things ever, because it changed, the trajectory of my career. But also, what happened was it ended up, as I told you, it's like my years of author relations work at Tyndale House, they prepared me for this second career of writing books with people, because so much about collaborating, when I'm working with somebody else on a book by them, whether it's, the first time it was writing a novel based on a song by a country musician. His name's Jimmy Wayne, and the book was Paper Angels. And he still keeps in touch with me. He's such a gracious guy. But a lot of the collaborations have been, I'm helping somebody write their life story. I'm helping them write their memoir. But that really it was one of those things where, I had said, I'm never doing this. And then of course the time comes and I'm like desperate. I'm like, what am I going to do? And so, yeah, that started the whole collaboration thing. But even there, I had to kind of just find my way. Fortunately, I knew the publishing industry. It's a small industry. But the one thing I remember, even back in the author relations days, I remember sitting in meetings and they would tell authors, okay, talk about brands and talk about, like, okay, this is who you need to be. And it's oftentimes like, you need to be in a box. Like, you need to be known as, like, for instance, Nicholas Sparks writes sweet love stories. John Grisham writes, for the most part, courtroom dramas. There's a reason why, big name authors, they're put in boxes. And I was always like, I don't want to be like that. I'm like, why can't an author be like an actor where they do different parts? And I still believe that to this day. That's a whole other subject, but I understand why that's difficult for readers, because, if a reader loves Stephen King's dark horror, if he suddenly writes a Nicholas Sparks type book, those readers, they're going to be like,
right. And if no one gets murdered, then they're going to be like, what's happening?
yeah. Sometimes those big name authors, they'll do something a little different, but I really did do the spectrum. My first book was Nicholas Sparks, and then I went into Stephen King territory. But I feel like even in nonfiction writing, like with co-writing, ghostwriting, what you have is you'll have writers who specialize in writing sports books, sports memoirs, or, business type books, politics. And part of that's natural because you need to have some sort of knowledge about things, and maybe an interest and a passion. But with my career, music has always been a love. So when I've worked with some musicians, that definitely makes sense. But, I worked with a politician once, and I don't know anything about politics or business people, and I've had to learn on the fly. But at the same time, what I've learned is that, you can, if you have the ability to tell a story and to do certain things with the book, and a lot of it's organizing and doing certain things, you really can, help someone else write their story. I've made a career out of being completely outside of the box and not being known for kind of anything. Going back to that 9th grade story about finishing the book, and I'll tell this to people when we first talk about the potential of me working with them. I say, look, the number one thing I feel is my talent is finishing something. It's like, here's a deadline, and, we need to get it done. And that doesn't mean that I'm just going to get it done, and in a fast and sloppy job, but it's just, that deadline. It's like there's a clock always ticking in my head, which is sometimes not so good, but but it helps me in my writing.
Yeah. Well, no, that's good, because I think you're preparing them to say, hey, listen, we're in this together. And although it's your story, my responsibility is to get it across the finish line. Right. So, yeah. Well, Travis, can you just share maybe from a 10,000 foot perspective, like, what does that collaboration look like? Like, how do you start? I'm sure it's a little different depending on the personality type of book, but just in general, how do you start it? And kind of what have you learned to kind of get it to go, through that journey from that first meeting right until you turn in the manuscript? Yeah,
I think the very first thing I do is to try to figure out what an author that I'm going to be working with, like what they want in the book. Why are they doing this book? Is it they're finally telling their life story? Is it a good thing to do? They've got all these different things that they're doing. And so this is part of their business, part of their brand. Sometimes it's a publisher has almost, convinced them to do a book, but they don't really even want to do a book, which I understand. There are all these different reasons why. So I really, I want to try to find that out right away. And then to just see sort of like who they are, how do they operate? How do they work? Because every single person is different. And, and these are things that, those don't necessarily tie into the book in terms of like just writing and structure and all that sort of stuff. But I need to get that first and foremost. So I just know, okay, how are we going to work together on this book? And in those author relations days, it's like they come back because I just try to accommodate the people I work with. It's like, how much do you want to communicate, and how do you want to work together? Most of the time, honestly, every single book's different. Yeah. So it's like, but I always feel like you need to have that sort of outline, that story map. And sometimes they come to me in a proposal, like sometimes, they've already sold it to the publisher. So you've got an entire outline proposal, but a lot of times those are still a little, it's like, okay, that's the first attempt to do it. But then once we get into it, I mean, I find myself just, okay, this is good, but it can be better, or let's do it a little different. And I mean, instantly, every time I hear about a potential project, a lot of times I've heard a little about this person, or maybe I don't know anything about them. And so I just do, like, I go crazy with, like, okay, reading about them, seeing, videos or social media and all that sort of stuff. And so much about it is catching up to sort of who they are, because we all live in these worlds now. Like I worked with a world-class bow hunter, and, he's incredible, but that's this world that I just don't know anything about. He runs ultra marathons. I don't run ultra marathons. I mean, it's and so all of a sudden it's a door to not just somebody else's life, but also just, another universe, in a sense, another world. And so that's exciting, but it's like, I don't waste any time. I mean, especially when it's like I had a book, and it literally was like, it's 3 months. Can you do this? And it was like a big, big, big book. And it was really intense because the timing was great, because I just finished projects. I had that time, but it takes so much time to write anybody's life story. And when you have somebody who's lived a very full life, a lot about it is just paring away the details.
There's a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah. And so it's like, I don't spend a lot of time just sitting at my desk. This is going to sound funny, but I don't spend a lot of time sitting at my desk thinking in terms of like, what do I do? And what do I write and all that? I mean, I just do it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like the Nike ad.
That's my main question. So, when I think, and again, if this offends you, correct me, but when I think of ghostwriting, right? Sometimes here's what I have in my mind. I don't know how accurate this is. I'm sure there's a spectrum. I see this person, whomever they are, has a book deal for whatever reason. They want it, or it's part of the brand or whatever. And then basically you need to like interview them, or, I don't see them writing a ton. I see you doing most of the writing, right? Asking questions, listening. Is that fair? Or do they actually sometimes write as well?
Yeah. That's a great question. That's one that a lot of people, especially when I talk about ghostwriting, because, sometimes my name is on a cover, or sometimes it's on the, title page inside. But I've learned that, when my name's on a cover, most people do not even see it. And it's like, it doesn't matter to anybody other than my family. And it
matters to me, just so you know.
Okay, good. It's one of those things I've done it where it doesn't matter to me. I just want the author and the publisher to know, I've done the best job possible. But most of the time it is me technically writing. But see, this is where it's like, okay, but if somebody says, well, you're doing all the writing and you don't get credit. Well, I'm taking most of the time I'll interview somebody, and a lot of times I'll go and see them, and I might spend 2-3 days with them. And then this is my style. Some writers are very different. I'm not going back and suddenly trying to invent some new sort of voice, or I don't fictionalize anything. I take what they are telling me, and I try to keep their voice as authentic as possible. So obviously somebody telling their story versus what it looks like in a book, it's going to look different, but I don't dramatically change what they tell me and put it in Travis Thrasher's voice. And I think there's some ghostwriters, co-writers that do that a little too much. They're not going to, most of the people I work with, they're doing other things in life. If they sounded like some poet, that would sound odd. They just need to, it's more about telling their story. And so in some ways I've been thinking of, like, often recently I've been saying this more and more, where I feel like I'm a curator, because it's like, here's 1,000 details of my life, but we can only select maybe maybe 100 details, but then, you can only put maybe 50 true anecdotes, scenes in a book. How do you do that? And so part of it is again, it's always sort of like, what's the box that this book goes in? It's
and also when you talk about authenticity or trying to keep their voice, I would, just to kind of dig into that a little bit more, when you're picking those 50 stories, I'm going to assume that you're picking those stories based on what you believe their voice is as you're interviewing them, or their, kind of their persona or attitude. Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And a big part of it, I don't feel like I'm a great interviewer when it comes to, being so articulate and asking the very right question. But at the same time, I feel like I'm a great interviewer when I'm with somebody, because I want them to feel comfortable enough to just share their story. And the more time I spend with them, even when it's just emailing or talking on the phone or Zoom calls, I start to pick up things that might not be, even stuff that they might not think that they want to include in a book. But the more I get to kind of hear what's inside of them, what's inside of their heart, like what makes them really, truly tick, that's the stuff that I start to go, oh, okay, we need to put this in the book, and I need to hear more about that. And that's this strange thing of like, I can't even I'm trying to describe it, but it's a very intuitive thing. So it's that's the relationship part of it. So that then, all of that is kind of in my head. It's in notes. And then when I come to the manuscript itself, I feel like then I'm almost sometimes using more of my left side of my brain, because it's organization. It's like, all right, you're telling somebody's life story, and they've lived, 30 years, they've lived 50 years. How do you organize this?
But is it fair to say, though, that I think what part of the difference is, what I'm kind of picking up from you is, when you talk about the intuitive part of it and being a curator, but you're also looking at a lens differently than if you were just talking to them or interviewing them for like an article. You're actually looking at it for a story arc, right? So is that fair? Like, you have your story arc glasses on, and you're thinking about, how do I make this 30, 50 year life into a great story? Is that?
Yeah. It is. And memoirs they're called memoirs instead of autobiographies, because, typically an autobiography is only for like a president or somebody, where it covers everything. Most people, even, famous people, the first like 18, 20 years of their life are, they're not that interesting. Sometimes they have really, like, everything in your first 18 years, it ends up sort of defining who you are. But at the same time, a lot of times readers don't want to read about that. Like, if you were in a famous band, well, okay, do you want to read about this person when they're 10 years old and they're living in such and such? I find myself, it's sort of like, okay, that's good to know, but let's get to the good stuff. But that's, again, how it's all like how you balance it. And it's, when I think about the writing process, or even sometimes I'll have to explain sort of my process to somebody who I might be potentially working with. And it's very difficult, because I can say, okay, this is how I do things. But then I look at the people I've worked with, and I'm like, every single book is different. Like I'll give you an example. So Ty Pennington, I worked with him. If you remember him, he's he was a host of the
Extreme Home Makeover guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Love that guy.
I'm Ty Pennington.
He's insane. I love him. He's like total ADD, and he's exactly like the person you see on TV. And the way we structured the book is like the way his brain works, where it's sort of like all over the board, but at the end, it had a purpose of sort of showing, this is what the brain of somebody with ADD, what it looks like. But the thing is, you can develop, you can go from start to finish, even in a book, from somebody like that. but that was one of those things, like it was kind of this creative way of telling that book or telling his story. So yeah, everything is, I don't know, I think I've wandered off track here, but
no, I think it's super fun. I have a few remaining questions here that I want to get to and respect your time. So, I guess one of my last questions is, what makes a good collaborator and what makes a challenging collaborator?
That's a good question. Challenging can be anything from like somebody who is like calling you, really, really late at night. I mean, like that's one of those things where it's like everybody is different. And so I think that probably the most challenging thing would be somebody who isn't really fully 100% into the idea of wanting to write and publish a book. I have had a few where they just feel sort of like maybe indifferent, or, a little more like, sometimes they just have so many things going on that then the book is not the top priority. And I get that. And that's why, like, I want to be able to figure that out and go, okay, this book is part of all the many things you have going on. So my job is not just to work on it, but to, just to maximize the brief amount of time I have with somebody. And to, so I think it's hard to kind of single out one thing as far as like challenging, because this as a creative who works with people and companies, every job creates, it has challenges in its own way. For instance, 3 months to write this very big book, that's challenging, but then, it might be challenging to just try to get an author to the finish line. That's been one of the things that I remember, that one project where the author just legitimately, they did not want to let go of the book, and they just kept tweaking it and changing. And I honestly, I was like, we've got to send it into the publisher. You've got to let it go, and that was hard for this person to let it go. So that was all about the relationship. That wasn't about the writing. It becomes like this unique partnership.
But it sounds like in the beginning, and I don't know if this is true, you try to set some ground rules of, like you said, if there's one thing I know I can do, I can get it done. And then do you try to do that as best you can, depending on the person, to say, hey, here's kind of how this process goes, and let's get after it?
Yeah, I try to set expectations, and we try to figure out a plan, like, okay, how exactly is this going to work? How much are we going to, am I going to interview somebody and then kind of go away and then end up writing a few chapters and sending it to them? Is it going to be like, am I going to write chapter to chapter, that sort of thing, and hand it in? A lot of times that's what I do. But yeah, it's, and oftentimes, we always know the deadline. So for me, it's always like, okay, I have 5 months, and I always sort of break it out. Like, this is what I should be doing. This is a goal. Like, my goal this week is through these 3 chapters. And I don't go into that much specifics with authors that I work with unless they really want that. If they do, cool.
It's awesome. All right. I have 2 fun questions, I think, for you. All right. Yes. So of your collabs so far, and that you can share, who have been some of your favorite collabs?
Oh, that's tough. I'm looking at books. So there's this band named Johnny Swim, and I think they would be considered singer-songwriter, indie rock.
All I see are angels, and all these streets of gold that lead to you.
I love them before I work with them. And there's a picture of me. You're going to love this. In the book at the very end, in the acknowledgments, they give me a shout out, and there's a picture of me at Lollapalooza, and they took a picture of the crowd, and I'm dead, and I'm like, ah! It's so classic. But it's Abner and Amanda, and they're just amazing individuals. They're like talented and good looking, and they've got these amazing children. They lived in LA, and he became a buddy. I mean, like I'd be texting him like about sci-fi movies, like, hey man, did you see Christopher Nolan's latest film? And that's the other thing I'll have to say about this is I become so close to these people because they have to kind of tell me everything. A lot of times they tell me more than they've told almost anybody.
They got to trust you too, right? I mean, that's an intimate thing. They do. Yeah.
It is. And so you develop this relationship, and then it's like the project ends and they go away, and I'm like, what happened? Like,
just lost my friend.
I know, it's like we broke up. And so I sometimes get, I mean, every single project I do, it seems like I start to really just, the more I learn about these people, and I'm like, man, this is fascinating, or this is amazing. Like, what an incredible individual. And sometimes I have to dial that down because I'm like, I'm professional, but I am who I am, and I want them to know, what I think, how passionate I am. The Johnny Swim one, I'm wondering if.
By the way, I'm going to find that picture and put it in our show notes.
Oh, it's great. I'll send it to you because it's, and I mentioned the Ty Pennington one, there's a few that are in the works, so I won't talk about those, but Jonathan Cain he's the keyboardist from the band Journey. So, and, Journey, everybody,
doesn't he live in Illinois? Just total side note.
No, he grew up in Chicago.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you're right about that. Oh, and so, he was telling his life story, and I'm a kid from the 80s and grew up listening to, Journey was part of the soundtrack of my childhood, and everybody knows Don't Stop Believing.
Don't stop believing.
A lot of people know Journey. People don't know Jonathan Cain, and that's very understandable. He understood that, but the first song I ever danced with my wife now, my wife is Sharon. In high school, we danced to this song Faithfully, which Jonathan Cain wrote.
I'm forever yours. Faithfully.
So that just shows you my preferences in one way, because I just mentioned two musicians. And Chris Caton is, he was a comedian. He's crazy. And I always told him, Chris, you're the brother I never wanted. I mean, and that shows my relationship. It's kind of like you and I. I mean, like you joking back and forth. He's just a gentle soul. But yeah, I mean, those are few that off the top of my head, but another one, and this book's about ready to come out. So Chef Andre Rush, his book is coming out next month. And
that's the White House chef for the Obama?
Yes.
Okay.
He's like the big guns.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. He is such a gentleman, such a professional. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's one of those, I mean, he's done everything. He's got so many stories. So it's sort of like, what do you pick? I mean, which one do you choose? And yeah, he's big on social media. And,
it sounds super fun though.
Yeah, he is. And actually right now I'm starting to help him write his cookbook, which, I mean, a cookbook, what do I like? Really? I can't make anything. But
what are you talking about? That sounds super fun. And you can,
it's awesome.
And you're a great writer. And obviously it shows the trust they have in you.
Yeah, I know more about him, and I have all the notes, and I'm probably going to go see him again. And it's less about, he's got the recipes. It's all about how do I, select stories and match them up with, certain things. And so, my encouragement to people, especially in the writing field, is like, it's something that you can grow into, you cannot just grow into becoming an NBA star. That doesn't happen.
Right.
But with writing, it's like one of those things, I never knew I'd be a memoir writer. I wrote a biography of the 1936 Berlin Olympians who ran with Jesse Owens. If I had told myself back at Tyndall that one day I would write that, I'd be like, how? Like, where did that come from? And I still to this day go, wow, how did that happen? But it's like one door opens and leads to another, you know this, and it's like suddenly you find yourself connecting with somebody. And then with that book, it was just an idea. I said, why isn't there a book about this? It was a documentary. And then the person I told, an actor, and he was like, well, what would you think about doing it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And I'm thinking, wow, it was a lot of work. But it's just one of those things where I feel like I've been learning as I do it. Like, sometimes you go to a class to, learn how to write a biography. I just learned how to write a biography by writing a biography.
Well, Trev, you've been so gracious with your time. I'm going to leave you with one question. It's going to be a hard one for you because I just know the way your brain works. So I'm going to throw it out there anyways. If you could collab with any celebrity, author, famous musician right now, and you could only pick, I'll give you two, one or two, and you could write their story or whatever, who would it be?
Okay. Well, the first is easy. And this just, and it's not a plug, but I'm about ready to come out with a biography of Bono. And I know more about Bono than probably, I don't know, very few people probably know more than I do because I spent, a couple years in his world. Now I haven't met him, but I just, it's one of these ideas that I was like, write a biography on Bono. And so it was one of these where it's like, there's so much out there on him. And it was really, truly kind of curating it. The more I got into the book, the more my admiration for him just grew. And of course, I love U2 and I love the music, but just as a person, he really is just utterly fascinating. He's funny. He's just all the things about him that make him such a unique person in interviews and the reason people love him. I think it would just be fascinating to hear more about, because I know so much, I could be like, okay, so this moment here, why did this happen? Or even he's never really spoken much about his wife because that's off limits. And so I would just, that's fascinating to know more about that. Or he's a father of 4. So, that's one. Another person, honestly, that I've even considered doing a biography, probably won't, but you probably know this. I probably shared we used to go see movies, right? And our love of movies. So Brad Pitt, I'm fascinated by not his personal life and all this stuff, but the movie choices he has done. They are just, I would almost love to just do a book on those characters because they're all incredible films. It's just fascinating, kind of like, what made you want to do this? That's one of those things where it's like less of the personal stuff, the relationships and all that, and more of just from an artistic standpoint. Why are you making these, creative decisions to choose this sort of character? I
love it.
Stephen King has always been influence, and I still would love to just talk to him about writing. He's, because he.
Have you ever? Did you see his masterclass on writing?
I haven't, and I need to do a deep dive on that.
Yeah, it's pretty.
All master. Was it good?
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I obviously, you and I've talked about this before. We have a lot of similar tastes. I'm a fan, and by the way, I still think one of Brad Pitt's best parts is when he played the gypsy in the Guy Ritchie movie.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there is a problem with pikeys or gypsies.
What are you doing, Potter? Get out the way back.
Can't really understand much of what is being said.
You tell me. Come about the caravan.
Mr. O'Neill.
Fuck, man. Call me Mickey.
It's not Irish. It's not English.
How are you?
Hey, the Welshman can't just for the horses, you know that.
It's just pikey.
Fuck me. Just look at the size of it. How big are you? Hey, kids. How big is he?
He's a big man, that's for sure.
Hey, man. Come and look at the size of this fella. Best your back's a little. Concert work. You look like a boxer.
Yeah, he's. I mean, people know now his sense of humor. Brad Pitt's got a sense of humor, but he's spent a career trying to make himself, in some ways, ugly. I mean, some of his roles, he's like deliberately playing down the good. Here's my thing on Brad Pitt really fast, and then we can go. Not that this has anything to do with anything, but I think he realized he's a good looking guy, but he is not, when he started, he was not a great actor. I mean, people would even say, you're probably not a good actor. I think he realized, man, I got a long ways to go, but I'm good looking. But he grew as his acting got better and better, but he, made amazing choices in films. And so, he was lucky enough to be in great films by great directors that I think sometimes made him look better.
Yeah.
And I think deep down, he sort of knows this, but then he became he became a great leading actor who he is now. Did you see Ad Astra, that movie?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we'll have to cut it here because you and I could talk about the nuances of Brad Pitt's career, and this is the kind of conversation.
Don't leave me, Justin.
These are the kind of conversations, by the way, to the listeners, that Travis and I would get lost in Tyndale sometimes when we were supposed to be doing other things. So,
yes.
Well, my friend, I just a couple things. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for always being there and gracious for me, especially when I had writing questions. Yeah. I also want to say congratulations. You and I have had many conversations years and years and years ago about could this dream come true, and here it is. Man, you're making it happen. Yeah. I'm so excited for you. And
thank you, man.
I can't wait to see future Travis Thrasher novels, full written or collabs. It doesn't matter. They're all been really great. So thanks, my man.
Thank you, Justin. And hey, if I want you to finish that second book, if you need some encouragement, reach out. I'm serious, completely.
You said something that really encouraged me, and I made note of it, is two things. One, get started.
Yep.
And finish. Right? I can always go back and edit and tweak and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. If you ever want to run ideas by me as far as you need input, do it. Because I'd love to help in any way, seriously.
Wow. Thank you so much, Travis, for not only being a great dude doing the show, but also just being a talented writer and great human. To read up on Travis and his various book projects, go to TravisThrasher.com. TravisThrasher.com. And buy or gift some of his books. Happy reading. I also want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing our show soundtrack. For more on Sleeping at Last music, please go to sleepingatlast.com or search for Sleeping at Last wherever you get your music from. And to Design Of's audio engineer, Steve Wick, who loved this episode so much, he started listening to his favorite book narrator again.
Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. If so, please give us a ranking on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tell others about our show on your social of choice, and stay tuned for more of Season 8 coming soon. Please follow us on Twitter at Design of Podcast, and check out our site at rule29.com/Design of Podcast. See you next episode.